The voice that stopped the room did not belong to a man. It belonged to a woman in a cream blazer and pearls who had not raised it above a murmur. And yet the four-piece string ensemble in the corner of the Rosewater ballroom seemed to feel it too. The cellist's bow dragging half a beat behind before the music faltered into something resembling quiet. "Excuse me." The woman, her name was Frances Whitfield Carr, wife of Aldous Whitfield Carr, whose construction empire had built half the commercial towers lining Bay Street, stepped deliberately into the path of a woman who had been walking toward the bar. "This event is by invitation only. I don't believe I've seen you before." The woman she had stopped was wearing a deep burgundy gown that caught the light when she moved. She was carrying nothing except a small clutch. She had natural hair pinned low, and she was the kind of still that comes not from timidity, but from having been tested enough times that stillness becomes a choice. Her name was Sable Okonkwo-Reid. Almost no one in that room would have known that name. But every single person in that room, had they checked their brokerage accounts or their pension portfolios or the valuation of any Canadian technology company in the past 6 years, had been touched by what that name had built. Sable did not answer Frances immediately. She looked at her, the way you look at something you are deciding whether or not to spend your energy on. "I have an invitation," she said. "I'm sure you do," Frances said, and the way she said it made clear she was not sure of any such thing. The Rosewater Gala was the kind of event that told itself it was about charity, but was actually about positioning. Every October it filled the second floor of the Hotel Lumiere in Toronto, with the kind of people who made decisions before they arrived about which other people were worth speaking to. The money raised went to a children's hospital foundation, and that was real and good and genuinely helped people. But the money was not why most of them came. Aldous Whitfield Carr came because his father had come before him, and his grandfather, before that, was one of the handful of rooms in Canada where you could make the kind of eye contact that became a contract over breakfast the following week. His firm, Whitfield Carr Development, had been operating for 63 years. It had built hospitals and universities and transit corridors. It had also, over the past 4 years, accumulated a debt position that its own CFO described privately as manageable until it wasn't. The project that was supposed to fix everything was called the Meridian North Corridor, a mixed-use development across 3 Ontario municipalities that would be the largest single infrastructure project in the province in a generation. Aldous had been angling for the lead contract for 2 years. His contacts in the provincial government were warm. His architectural plans were finished. The only thing he needed was the technology platform to manage the build. The integrated logistics and procurement software that the provincial tender had quietly specified as a requirement in its most recent revision. That software was called Axiom. There was only one company that made it at the scale required. That company was called Okonkwo-Reid Systems. Aldous did not know this yet. His people were still working through the tender specifications. He had spent the evening glad-handing, mentioning Meridian North with calibrated casualness, keeping the energy light. He was good at this. He had been doing it for 30 years. Frances, for her part, had spent those same 30 years watching. She knew had made exactly who wandered in from the lobby, and who had made a mistake and wandered in from the lobby. She was not cruel by her own accounting. She simply had standards. Sable Okonkwo-Reid had been born in the basement apartment of Aroas in Scarborough. Her mother worked double shifts at a long-term care facility. Her father had left when Sable was 4 and reappeared occasionally in the way that people who feel guilty about leaving do, with small gifts and large gaps between visits. She had learned to code at a public library because it was free and the computers were available, and a librarian named Mr. Ferreira had shown her once how to make a basic program, and she had not been able to stop since. She had studied computer science at the University of Waterloo on a scholarship that she applied for had done it before, because she did not know there was supposed to be someone to help her. And she did not know there was supposed to be someone to help her. She had worked 4 jobs between her second and third year to avoid going into debt. By the time she was 30, she had built and sold her first company. By 34, she had used the proceeds to build raid systems, which developed enterprise infrastructure software for large-scale construction and municipal projects. By 38, Axiom had become the dominant platform in the Canadian market. By 41, the company held licensing agreements with 3 American state governments and was in active discussions with the UK's infrastructure ministry. She was 43 years old on the night of the Rosewater Gala. She had been invited by the Hospital Foundation's board chair, a woman named Dr. Patricia Mensah-Cole, who was a close friend and who had personally asked Sable to come and consider joining the Foundation's advisory council. Sable had cleared her Thursday evening and arranged for her daughter to be picked up from ballet and come because Patricia had asked her, and because Sable believed in the hospital's work. She had not come to network. She had come because a friend had asked. "I have an invitation," Sable said again, evenly, and made to step around Francis. Francis moved with her. A small adjustment, but deliberate. "Perhaps you could show me?" Francis said. "We've had issues with the door list this year." There was a man standing 2 feet away, Arthur Dunmore, who sat on the board of 2 major pension funds and had been in a conversation about squash when the exchange began. He had stopped talking. He was watching. He did not say anything. There were others watching too, the kind of watching that people do when they're deciding whether something is happening or whether they're imagining it. Sable opened her clutch. She produced the printed invitation, physical, because the Foundation still did it that way, and held it out. Francis looked at it the way you look at something that was supposed to settle a question and has, inconveniently, settled it against you. She said nothing for a moment, and then she did something that altered the next 14 days of her family's life and erased, in a single gesture, everything her husband had spent the past 2 years building toward. She took the invitation from Sable's hand, glanced at it, and let it fall. It wasn't a dramatic drop. It wasn't theatrical. She simply opened her fingers and let the card meet the floor the way you drop something that has told you nothing you needed to know. Then she reached out. Not a slap in the way, a slap in a film looks, not an open palm swung from the shoulder, but a quick, sharp contact against Sable's forearm, pushing her hand aside, and said, "I don't think so." The string ensemble had stopped entirely by then. Sable looked down at the invitation on the floor. She looked at Francis. She looked at the room, the turned heads, the held drinks, the 11 or 12 people who had seen exactly what had happened and were waiting, in the particular Canadian way, to see what came next before deciding what they thought of it. She bent down and picked up the invitation. She straightened. She said, "Thank you," in a tone that meant something entirely different from its words. Then she walked to the bar, ordered sparkling water, and stood quietly in the way that people who know something the room doesn't know stand quietly. Aldous found her 20 minutes later by accident. He had been making his way toward the Foundation's executive director when Patricia Mensah-Cole intercepted him, warmly, the way Patricia did everything, and said, "Aldous, I want to introduce you to someone. Sable, this is Aldous Whitfield Carr. Aldous, Sable Okonkwo-Reid." Aldous was good at names. He was particularly good at names that had appeared in his briefings. He shook her hand and he felt something shift in his chest. Not guilt exactly, because he had not been there, but something adjacent to it. He said, "It's a real pleasure." Sable said, "Likewise." Patricia, who knew Sable well enough to read the precise register of her pleasantness, glanced between them and said nothing. They spoke for 11 minutes. Aldous had intended to speak for 3 and move on, but he found himself interested in spite of himself, or perhaps because of himself. Because the more she talked about Axiom's implementation framework, the more clearly he understood what he was talking to. She was not selling, she was describing. There is a kind of intelligence that doesn't need to perform, and this was that kind. He mentioned Meridian North. He mentioned it the way he mentioned it to everyone that evening, lightly, with the practiced ease of someone dropping a stone into water to measure the depth by the sound. Sable nodded. She said, "That's a significant project. The Phase 2 logistics alone would be considerable. We're working through the platform requirements," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the same quality of stillness she had shown Francis 40 minutes earlier, and then said, "Well, when your team gets there, feel free to have them reach out." She handed him a card. He looked at the card. It said, Sable Okonkwo-Reid, founder and CEO, Okonkwo-Reid Systems. He held the card for a moment longer than was natural. "I look forward to it," he said. His director of procurement, a thorough man named Elliot Daw, reached Aldous by phone the following morning at 7:43. Elliot did not generally call before 8. Aldous answered on the second ring. "The tender revision," Elliot said. "The technology platform specifications. What about them?" "They require Axiom-certified integration. The province isn't naming a company, but there's only one company that holds the full Axiom certification for infrastructure projects at this scale." There was a silence on the line. "Okonkwo-Reid Systems," Aldous said. "Yes." Another silence. "Pull everything you can find on their licensing structure," Aldous said. "Schedule a meeting. Whoever you need to talk to there." "Of course," Elliot said. And then, after a beat, "They're not a small outfit, Aldous. She built this herself. The company's valued just under $4 billion. Aldous said nothing for a moment. "Get the meeting," he said, and ended the call. He sat in his kitchen for a while after that. Through the window, the lake was gray and flat. He thought about the evening before. He thought about Frances moving through the room the way she always moved, sorting people the way she had always sorted them. He thought about how many times he had watched her do that and said nothing, and told himself it was not his business. He thought about the invitation on the floor. He called Frances. She answered immediately, which meant she had been expecting the call. "Last night," he said. "Good morning to you too," she said. "Frances." She was quiet. He could hear her breathing. "I didn't know who she was," she said finally. "That's not the point," he said, and he knew even as he said it that he didn't fully believe his own words, because the knowing who she was had in fact changed something in him, and he was not proud of that. "Aldous," she said. "She was. She is Sable Okonkwo-Reid," he said, "and we need her company to build Meridian North." Frances was quiet for a long time. "I'll call her," she said. "I'll explain." "You'll what?" "I'll apologize," Frances said. "I'll reach out through the foundation and—" "You don't understand," Aldous said. "This isn't about managing a situation. You put your hand on her. In a room full of people, it wasn't." Frances started, then stopped. "It was," he said. The call from Aldous' office reached Okonkwo-Reid Systems on a Wednesday morning. Sable's executive assistant, a careful and perceptive woman named Bev, took the message and placed it in the folder marked Pending Review rather than the folder marked Priority. Because Bev paid attention to things and had been with Sable long enough to understand that not every incoming request was what it claimed to be. Sable read the message that evening after her daughter was in bed. The message requested a meeting to discuss potential technology partnership opportunities related to the Meridian North development tender. She held her phone in her hand for a moment. She knew about Meridian North. Of course she knew. Her team had been tracking every major infrastructure tender in the country for 3 years. Meridian North had been flagged 14 months ago as a near-certain match for Axiom. The numbers were right. The scale was right. The provincial specification language, when the revision had come through, had been so clearly written around Axiom's feature set that her legal team had flagged it for review. She had been expecting exactly this call. Not from Whitfield Carr specifically, but from someone on the tender. Multiple firms were positioned for the lead contract, and every one of them would need Axiom. She forwarded the message to her VP of Partnerships with a single line. Standard intake process. No exceptions. Standard intake meant weeks of preliminary documentation exchange and due diligence calls before a meeting was even scheduled. It was not designed to be obstructive. It was the process her team had built because Axiom was complex, and the firms that wanted to use it needed to understand what they were committing to. Every client went through it. Every client would continue to go through it. Aldis's team found the process frustrating. They were not accustomed to being on the receiving end of intake procedures. Elliot managed it with his usual patience, but reported to Aldis that the timeline was going to stretch and that Okonkwo Raid Systems showed no signs of making an exception. Aldis told Elliot to continue through the process. Francis, meanwhile, had written and rewritten a message to Sable 4 times. The first version apologized for the misunderstanding. She deleted that because it wasn't a misunderstanding. The second version explained that she had not intended to be rude. She deleted that because intention and impact are different things and she knew it. The third version said she was sorry for what she had done. She looked at that one for a long time. She sent the fourth version, which was closer to the third, but still contained, embedded in the phrasing, the suggestion that things had perhaps been more ambiguous than they were. Sable read it once and did not respond. The intake process took 3 weeks. The first formal meeting between Whitfield Carr's team and Okonkwo Raid Systems was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in November. In the boardroom of Okonkwo Raid's King Street offices, Aldis had planned to send Elliot. He changed his mind on the morning of the meeting and went himself. He had been in that building once before, years ago, when it had been something else entirely. The lobby now had the particular quality of a company that doesn't need to announce itself. Clean lines, no logos on the wall, a woman at the front desk who was friendly without performing it. They were brought to the boardroom on the 14th floor. There were 4 people from Okonkwo Raid's team already seated. Sable was not one of them. Thus, she came in 6 minutes later, not late. The meeting began at 2:30, and she arrived at 2:30. She had simply not been in the room before the meeting started. She sat across from Aldis. She had a folder in front of her. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at the Rosewater. Clear, direct, without performance in either direction. "Mr. Whitfield Carr," she said. "Thank you for coming in. Thank you for having us," he said. There was a beat. Not uncomfortable exactly, but present. "I appreciate that you came yourself," she said. "It helps to have the principal in the room for these conversations." He said, "I felt the same." They moved into the meeting. Sable's team was thorough and precise. The Axiom platform had requirements. Integration lead times, data governance structures, training protocols, and her team went through each of them without softening any of it. This was not a sales pitch. It was a statement of how things worked. 40 minutes in, one of Whitfield Carr's directors raised the question of timeline flexibility. Whether Axiom's implementation schedule could be compressed, given the Meridian North tender deadlines. Sable looked at him carefully. "What's the deadline you're working with?" he told her. She looked at her VP of engineering, a quiet woman who gave a small, steady shake of her head. "No," Sable said. "The implementation timeline exists because it works. Compressing it introduces risk that gets paid for later by the project, not by us. We don't do that." The director started to say something about competitive flexibility. Sable said, "This isn't a negotiation about our process. This is us explaining it so you can decide if it works for you." The room was very still. Aldis said, "We understand." He looked at the director. "We work with the timeline." The director said nothing more. Toward the end of the meeting, after the technical team from both sides had stepped into a side conversation about data specifications, Aldis and Sable were briefly alone at the main table. He had been deciding for the past 20 minutes whether to say anything. He said, "I owe you an apology. For the Rosewater, I wasn't there when it happened, but I should have said something long before this." She looked at him. "I know what Francis did," he said. "I know what it was, and I know that saying it wasn't my business is not the same as it not having been my business." Sable was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from that apology, Mr. Whitfield Carr?" He had not expected the question. He stopped. "I suppose I want you to know that I understand what happened." "You want me to tell you that it's all right," she said. Not unkindly, precisely. He was quiet. "It isn't all right," she said. "It doesn't need to be for us to do business if the partnership makes sense. Those are separate things." But I'm not going to tell you it's all right because it wasn't. He said nothing for a moment. That's fair, he said. Yes, she said. It is. The due diligence continued for another 6 weeks. Elliot's team worked through the documentation with Okonkwo Raid's contracts division and found no surprises, which was itself a kind of finding, because firms that produce no surprises in due diligence are either hiding everything or have nothing to hide, and the volume and clarity of what Okonkwo Raid produced made the second answer obvious. Aldous reviewed the final proposal himself. The pricing was not low. It was exactly what it was worth, and Aldous knew enough to know the difference. He signed. 2 days after the contract was executed, the Provincial Tender Office confirmed Whitfield Car Development as the lead contractor for Meridian North, in part because their technology integration plan, certified and anchored by Axiom, was the only submission that fully met the revised specifications. The contract value was $1.3 billion. Elliot Daw sent Aldous a one-line message when the confirmation came through. It said only, "Meridian North is ours." Aldous read it sitting at his desk and felt not the clean satisfaction he had expected, but something more complicated, a relief undercut by a threat of something he would have to decide what to do with. Francis's apology letter had gone unanswered. 3 weeks after the contract was signed, she tried again. This time the letter was shorter. This time it said only that she had been wrong and that she was sorry, and that she understood if the apology was not something Sable wished to engage with, but that she had needed to say it. She mailed it, physical like the invitation. Sable received it on a Tuesday. She read it at her kitchen table while her daughter ate toast and talked about a school project involving Canadian ecosystems. Sable listened to her daughter, explained the boreal forest, and held the letter and read it twice. She did not respond. But she did not throw it away either. She put it in a drawer. The news about the Meridian North Award ran in the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and 3 business publications. 2 of them mentioned Okonkwo Raid Systems. One of them ran a short profile of Sable. Her Scarborough beginnings, the library where she'd learned to code, the scholarship, the 4 jobs, the first company, the second. The profile ran beside a photograph in which she was looking slightly to the left of the camera, not posing, caught mid-thought. Dr. Patricia Mensah-Cole texted her when the article ran. She sent a string of the same emoji 3 times. Sable texted back. "How was I in the photo?" Patricia replied. "You looked like someone who just won and knows better than to make a face about it." Sable put her phone down and smiled at the ceiling for a moment. Her daughter came in from her room with a book and climbed onto the couch beside her, without asking, the way children do when they have decided where they want to be. Sable shifted to make room. Outside, November had settled hard over the city. The streets below the window were slick and lit in orange from the lamps. Sable sat with her daughter and did not think about the Rosewater Gala. She did not think about Francis Whitfield's pearls, or the invitation on the marble floor, or the room full of people who had watched and said nothing. She did not think about Meridian North, or the $1.3 billion, or the profile in the paper. She thought about a library in Scarborough and a man named Mr. Ferreira who had once leaned over a computer screen and said, "Watch this," and the feeling that had moved through her when the program ran for the first time, clean and exact, and doing precisely what she had told it to do. That was what she had built from. That was what she kept building from. Nothing that had happened at the Rosewater had touched that. Nothing ever would.